Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's story. In this episode, after all the separation, regret, and silence, James, Diep, and little Nee finally find their way back to one another. The man who once walked away from love and responsibility now returns, not as a wealthy CEO, but as a simple man who chooses family over fortune. Together, they rebuild not just a fence or a garden, but a home. A place where laughter replaces loneliness and where every seed planted is a promise of tomorrow. Stay with us until the end, because this reunion reminds us that sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures, just the courage to come back. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers. Your support truly means the world to us. Evening settles slowly over the countryside, painting the sky in streaks of rose and amber. James's shirt clings to his back as he drags another roll of wire mesh uphill, muscles burning with every step. He stops beside the wooden posts Diep set earlier, breath coming hard, but his eyes soften when they meet hers. She's there, hair damp with sweat, hands rough from the hoe, still giving quiet instructions like she's been doing this her whole life. "That side's for the chicken coop," she says, pointing with the handle of her hoe. "The slope near the bamboo will drain better when it rains." James nods, lowering the post into place. He listens, not just to her words, but to the steady rhythm of her breath, the crickets, the faint clucking of hens down the hill. Every sound feels alive here. Every breath feels earned. When he strikes the hoe into the hardened ground, the impact reverberates up his arms, sharp but satisfying. Sweat slides down his face, dripping into the dry red earth like a small offering. Diep comes over with a worn metal cup. "Here," she says, pressing it into his hand. "Drink. The sun here is harsh. Your city skin isn't used to it." He chuckles, takes a sip, and for a second, he just stares at her hand on his. Calloused, strong, yet soft in a way that makes him want to stay, to stop running. As they work side by side, the day fades into golden dust. They pace the field, counting steps to measure spacing. She insists on 1 meter between posts. He argues for 70 centimeters. She shakes her head, smiling. "You think everything tighter means better." He laughs, teasing, "Efficiency, Miss Farmer. Haven't you heard of productivity metrics?" But her grin, bright and careless, disarms him. They end up meeting halfway. When Diep bends to tie the measuring string, her hair slips loose and something tightens inside James. The sunset crowns her silhouette in fire, and for a moment, she's not the woman who used to sell corn by the roadside. She's the future he's been too afraid to imagine. A simple one, yes, but real. He picks up the hoe again, feeling something break open inside him. The invisible wall between his polished city life and this red earth simplicity starts to crumble. And with every strike of the hoe, he feels lighter. A faint drizzle falls. The smell of wet soil mixes with the earthy tang of manure. Diep balances a heavy bucket, moving carefully between furrows. "Let me carry that," James calls out, rushing over. "It's too much for you." She laughs, glancing back under the rim of her conical hat. "I've carried heavier. You're the CEO, remember?" "Not anymore," he says quietly, but she doesn't catch it. Together, they lift the bucket. Their shoulders brush, breath mingling in the humid air. Neither speaks. There's no need. The sound of soil being turned and seedlings planted fills the silence. James opens a pack of seeds: cabbage, tomatoes, herbs. And Diep leans over to watch, eyes soft. "Leave some space," she advises, "so the roots can breathe." He grins. Closer means faster harvest, more food for Nye. She laughs. "You sound like a man planning a family." His smile fades just slightly. "Maybe I am." They plant until the light slips behind the bamboo grove. The air cools, and the scent of new soil wraps around them. James straightens, back aching, eyes following the faint trail of smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. "Diep," he says suddenly, "if I give up my job, if there's no big salary, no office, would you still sell me corn for $65,000? She pauses, hand frozen mid-motion. The breeze stirs the edge of her scarf. "The corn's the same price," she murmurs. "But dinner at my house is free. You can eat as much as you want." He laughs softly, but the sound trembles. She said it like a joke, yet it lands deep. Too deep. The kind of thing you don't say unless you mean it. When the last post is fixed, he jumps on the old wave motorbike and speeds off, the wind sharp on his face. The schoolyard is already half empty when Nye spots him. Her tiny frame bursts from the gate, pink backpack bouncing, hair flying. "Uncle James!" she squeals, running to him. "You're late." He lifts her onto the seat, her little arms wrapping tight around his waist. For a moment, everything feels right again. The road, the wind, her laughter, like a song he thought he'd forgotten. By the time they reach home, twilight has melted into night. The yard smells of damp soil and new plants. Diep is in the kitchen, steam curling up from the pot. Nye runs to grab the broom, sweeping the red brick yard with serious concentration. James grins. "Hey, let Uncle do that. You rest, little one." But Nye shakes her head, puffing her cheeks. "I want to help. Aunt Diep said hard work makes food taste better." He crouches beside her, showing how to twist the steel wire for the new fence. Her small fingers fumble, but she learns fast. "Like this, see?" he says, guiding her hands. "Tight enough so the chickens can't escape." She nods solemnly. "And we'll raise lots, right? So Aunt Diep can cook stew every day." Diep brings out a tray of cold tea, watching them in the golden light of the oil lamp. The glow softens everything: the rough wires, the dirt on their clothes, the unspoken love between the three of them. Nye hands them glasses proudly. "Drink, Uncle James, Aunt Diep. You worked hard." James takes his cup, voice thick. "With Nye here, we're never tired." They sit together as night deepens. The last piece of wire is fastened. The fence stands solid. Nye claps her hands, squealing, "It's done! It's beautiful!" James laughs, touching her hair. "Soon we'll have vegetables, chickens, and lots of herb stew just for you." Diep smiles, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Yes, we'll make sure our little one grows fast and strong." A warm silence fills the yard. Stars glimmer faintly above, and the fields shimmer in moonlight. James looks at the two of them, Diep with her gentle eyes, Nye dancing near the fence, and something inside him clicks into place. He's been chasing success, status, endless numbers. But here, in the stillness of the countryside, he's found everything that ever truly mattered. As the wind stirs the bamboo leaves, he whispers under his breath, almost to himself, I choose this. I choose to stay. Diep doesn't hear the words, but she feels his hand slip into hers, fingers lacing together, warm and certain. And for the first time in a long while, both of them stand still. No running, no waiting, just living. The new fence glints faintly under the moonlight. It's strong enough to keep the chickens in, but not strong enough to keep love out. Inside its circle, 3 shadows, one tall, one slender, one small, move together, framed by the gentle glow of the lamp. And for James, that's all the home he'll ever need. Morning breaks gently over the farm, mist clinging to the low valley, and dew glimmering like silver beads on the young cabbage leaves. Roosters crow in the distance, and the faint smell of wood smoke seeps through the thin morning air. Inside the small house, James wakes to the rustling of pots and the soft rhythm of Nee's laughter. He turns over, the bamboo mat creaking, and for the first time in months, he feels rested. Diep is by the stove, stirring porridge with a wooden spoon. Nee stands on a low stool beside her, tiny hands gripping a bowl of chopped herbs. Sprinkle these slowly, Diep says gently. Not all at once, or it won't smell good. Yes, Aunt Diep, the girl chirps, eyes glowing with concentration. The sight warms James's chest in a way words can't describe. He steps outside, stretching under the soft dawn light. The vegetable beds shimmer with dew, rows perfectly straight. A stray chicken clucks and hops near his feet. James smiles, squatting to feed it some grain. You're early too, huh? He murmurs. Behind him, Diep's voice floats out from the kitchen. Breakfast's almost ready, Mr. CEO. He laughs. That title's retired. Then what should we call you now? She teases. He pauses, eyes on the rising sun. Just James, he says quietly. A farmer, maybe a father if I'm lucky. When they sit down for breakfast, Nye pushes her bowl toward him proudly. I helped cook this, she announces. James tastes it. Soft rice, fragrant herbs, just a hint of ginger. Delicious, he says sincerely. Better than any restaurant. Nye beams, her cheeks round with joy. Then you'll stay and eat my cooking every day? He looks at Diep, who's pretending to busy herself with a spoon, but can't hide the tiny smile tugging at her lips. Yes, he says finally, if Aunt Diep lets me. After breakfast, they walk down to the pond behind the garden. The air hums with life. Frogs croak, dragonflies shimmer over the water. Nee skips stones, laughing when they bounce twice before sinking. James watches her from the bank, heart swelling. He remembers the day he first met her. Shy, quiet, clutching her little sketchbook. Now, she's bursting with laughter, sunlight caught in her hair. It hits him that this, right here, is what he's been missing. Simple, unhurried happiness. Diep sits beside him, rolling her sleeves. She's changed a lot since you came back, she says softly. Before, she barely spoke. Drew sad faces all day. James's throat tightens. And you still let me come back? Diep glances at him. I didn't stop you. Maybe I was just waiting for you to realize where you belong. The wind ripples across the pond. Neither speaks for a while. Then Nye runs up, waving a small wildflower. For Aunt Diep, she giggles. And for Uncle James, too, because you both worked hard. Diep takes the flower, tucking it behind her ear. Thank you, sweetheart. James leans down. You should save one for your mom, too, he says softly. Nye blinks up at him, confusion flickering before she smiles again. But Aunt Diep is my mom now, she says innocently, and you're my dad. The words pierce straight through him. Diep freezes, wooden smile trembling on her lips. James stares at Nye for a long moment, then reaches out, pulling her into his arms. Okay then, he murmurs, voice thick. Your mom and dad are right here. The rest of the morning passes in quiet, rhythmic peace. James repairs the coop door while Diep hangs laundry under the sun. Nye hums nearby, stringing tiny flowers into a clumsy bracelet. A dog barks in the distance, a reminder of how alive this small patch of earth feels compared to the sterile hum of his old office. The contrast strikes him hard. Fluorescent lights versus sunlight. Endless reports versus a child's laughter. Later, as noon heat rises, Diep brings out iced tea and sits beside him on the steps. You really gave everything up? She asks gently. The company, the salary, your father's approval? James nods. I sent in my resignation last week. She looks startled. You didn't tell me? I wanted to be sure I wasn't just acting on guilt. He pauses, glancing toward Nye chasing butterflies. But I realize something. Success means nothing if there's no one waiting for you to come home. Diep stares at him, eyes glimmering. And what about your father? He'll be furious. But maybe, one day, he'll understand. She exhales slowly, the corners of her lips lifting. You're brave, James. Not many men walk away from what the world calls success. He laughs softly. Maybe I'm just tired of fighting the wrong battles. The afternoon wanes into amber light. Together, they gather vegetables from the garden, round tomatoes, crisp lettuce, fragrant basil. Diep kneels to rinse them at the stone basin, and James helps, splashing water playfully. She scolds him half-heartedly, but when he flicks another drop, she laughs, the sound bright as a bell. Nye watches them, giggling, then joins in, sending water flying everywhere. For a few minutes, the air is filled only with laughter, loud, real, unstoppable. As they sit drying in the sunlight, Diep glances at him. You know, Nye's been saving her drawings. She says she'll give them to you when you build your house here. James raises a brow. Our house, you mean? Diep blushes faintly, but doesn't deny it. Maybe, she murmurs, if you promise not to leave again. He reaches over, brushing her damp hair aside. Never again. Evening falls, and the small family lights a fire in the yard. The smell of grilled corn fills the air, mixed with the earthy scent of lemongrass. Fireflies blink like scattered stars. Nye curls up beside James, her head resting on his knee. Uncle. No, Dad. She corrects herself shyly. When I grow up, can I help you plant more vegetables? He laughs, stroking her hair. You'll do more than that, little one. You'll run the farm better than I ever could. Diep looks up from turning the corn. And I'll teach her all my secret recipes, she says warmly. Nye giggles. Then we'll open a shop. We'll sell our food, and Dad will take care of the chickens. James nods. Deal. The fire crackles. Above them, stars spill across the sky like diamonds on velvet. The fields whisper in the wind, and somewhere, a nightbird calls. James wraps an arm around Diep's shoulders, pulling her close. She doesn't resist. Nye's breathing evens out, soft and steady against his side. "This feels like a dream," Diep whispers. "No," James replies, eyes fixed on the flickering fire. "It's the first time I'm really awake." They sit in silence, three shadows bound together by warmth, laughter, and the shared soil beneath their feet. In the distance, the faint lights of the city shimmer, a world James once called home, but now feels miles away. Here, under the open sky, with the two people he loves most, he's finally found peace. And as the night deepens, the wind carries their quiet laughter across the valley, gentle, unhurried, and full of promise for the life they'll build together.